Hi, I'm Anne Gaviola. Welcome to the Peak on Global, where we break down what is trending in the business world and what you need to know to stay ahead of the curve. Joining me now is Brett Chang from the Peak Podcast. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, Anne. Great to be with you.
Let's start things off with a look at the fact that, the Bank of Canada moved out of interest rate pause mode and back to hiking with a 25 basis point increase. So that brings its key lending rate to 4.75% this week. The central bank says April's data really was the tipping point with strong GDP, jobs, and hot inflation numbers. Thoughts, Brett?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And if you look at the broader economy, it's still running very hot. You see that unemployment remains low, inflation is still going up, and the Bank of Canada's mandate is to try and tame that inflation, and that's what they're pursuing. Now, the big question that I think is on everyone's mind is how will the Federal Reserve respond in the next month and beyond? And so we'll have to see, but it's going to be interesting to see whether this is the last rate hike, if they'll maintain it for a bit, or if they'll end up reducing it if the economy starts to go in a different direction.
Yeah, well, we're seeing the jobs numbers head into a different direction. So there's some starts there that we can look at in terms of the data points. I want to switch gears a little bit, though. We talk often about the immediate impact of rate hikes on variable rate debt. Big one, obviously, variable rate mortgages, of course. But what about the knock-on effect on other things like the rental market, which is uncomfortably red hot in some markets, including Toronto and Vancouver, at least from a tenant's perspective or for anyone looking to rent. What are your thoughts on this, Brett?
A few segments ago, we talked about this exact issue, household debt. It's at an all-time high in Canada, and that's okay when times are good, when everybody's got a job and everybody can afford to pay off the interest on their debt, whether that be credit card debt or auto loans or mortgages. That's all okay. The problem becomes when unemployment starts to increase and people are losing their jobs, but they still hold on to all of this debt. And then you start to see the fall-on effect of that, which is people start to default on credit cards, on auto loans, but most importantly on mortgages, which puts the banks in a very difficult position and the government as well. And so that's what everyone's looking out for. And you're starting to see unemployment creep up. I will say it's a bit perverse when you think about it that we are increasing interest rates because we want unemployment to go up because the economy is running too hot. But that's just kind of how it is. And it's terrible to see. Nobody wants to see a recession happen. And so your Bank of Canada is trying to balance this really fine line between both interest rates going up, keeping inflation down, and also maintaining a stable set of unemployment numbers so that the majority of people can continue to maintain a job and pay off whatever debt and interest they might have.
Yeah, and when we talk about, connecting the dots for our viewers, if you look down the line, what higher interest rates may do is put the squeeze on the development, the construction of some rental units. And if you thought, the rental market was red hot and uncomfortable now, there may be more of that in the future as a result of what the central bank is doing. Let's switch gears and talk about this interesting time for our second topic. Tim Hortons doing some interesting things, getting into the credit card business and the rewards point space more fulsomely beyond roll up the rim. So it is planning to offer 2 credit cards through its mobile app, including one geared towards people with no or limited credit history like students and newcomers. What are your thoughts on this, Brett, and the timing of this?
Well, it's really interesting, and it's something that a lot of other brands have done, especially in the US, and probably the best analog for them would be Starbucks. Now, what I think a lot of brands have figured out, and this is why you see credit cards issued by all of these different companies and different brands that we shop at every day, is that they get a cut of the transaction volume. So not only can they encourage you with that credit card to spend more money at Tim Hortons, but also if you spend elsewhere, they also get a cut of that transaction fee too. So it's just a new revenue stream that Tim Hortons can monetize on top of their existing core business of the restaurants.
Yeah, and keep people in the kind of Tim Hortons mobile app universe. I think they've also figured out that people who collect points, a large segment of the population, they don't necessarily want to save up for, a clothing steamer. They want things like donuts and gas and kind of smaller rewards or treats, as it were. Our third topic, though, is something I've really wanted to get into with you. This week, Apple unveiled its first AR/VR headset. The cost, an astounding $3,500 US. Lots to unpack here, but my very first question is, would you use this headset, Brett?
I think the short answer is yes. Now, if you look back at the history of AR and VR, you would see these demos that were incredible, whether it was Magic Leap or Google Glass or Meta and the Oculus. And you look at these demos and you can't help but be wowed by them. And I thought the same thing when I was watching the Apple keynote live, seeing all of the different use cases and how it might work and how you might be able to incorporate it into your life. But what I've read now is that journalists are beginning to try it out. They're getting some demos, some 30-minute demos, and they're saying it's absolutely incredible, that it is as advertised and it works as they show. this is not going to be the most accessible headset. It's expensive. It has very limited use cases right now, but I think the potential is there. And the fact that Apple is doing it gives them a huge advantage. They have the software and the hardware capabilities to make something really great. So I'm super excited about this.
Yeah, let's dig into that Apple advantage. So we know that rival Meta, who is Facebook's parent company, is big into the headset space, maybe the first mover advantage there. The early reviews suggest Apple's version is superior. I mean, it costs a ton more, so it better be a lot better. We do know that the Apple effect, though, is a big one. Should we get comfortable with this technology? Because based on history, Apple has a way of creating products that can become indispensable, like tablets, smartphones, etc., even if their competition has a huge head start. I'm looking at you, BlackBerry.
Yeah, I think it's a great comparison to make when you look at the history of Apple and products like the iPhone. When the iPhone first came out, I remember when it came out, and there's a lot of reviews around it that it was too expensive. Nobody would buy it. The use cases were limited. And look, everyone's got an iPhone now. Same thing with the iPad. Same thing with the watch. And I think this might be the same thing with the headset. The Apple advantage really, though, comes down to their ability to produce incredible hardware. Hardware is really hard to do. It's really hard to make. It's hard to manufacture. It's hard to do R&D on. And the fact that they have those internal capabilities, plus they can do the software side as well, makes them best in class. This headset, I think the reason why people are saying it works so well is because they're able to deploy these Apple chipsets, in silicon they call it, that other companies just can't do. Meta doesn't know how to make chips. It's just out of their core competency, where Apple, that is part of what they do for all of their different devices.
And sometimes with Apple, it is back to basics in the user experience. I tried on AR, VR headsets, pre-Oculus days, and they made me kind of dizzy. It was really cool, but I could not imagine, putting it on for much longer than 15 minutes. What Apple has done with their latest incarnation, though, is they've given you the option as well to be able to just see normally. So the people in front of you, they can see your eyes. It's all this stuff that is kind of back to basics and makes such a difference when it comes to the user experience. Thank you so much for all your time and your insight, as always, Brett.
Thank you, Anne.
Super appreciate it. And you can get all your daily business news with the Peak Daily Podcast. It's available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.